Our ring has been soldered. Come out of the pickle. You can see that silver line there all the way through the ring seam, so we know it's soldered. And right now, our ring isn't perfectly circular. It is more of an oval shape. So we've got to make it perfectly circular before we start actually blending the seam together with a file. So when we fit the seam, it doesn't matter if the ring is a perfect circle. All we're concerned about is getting that seam to fit together with no light shining through, no gaps. So we equal filed it, we sprung it together by bending it back and forth until it stayed together with no light shining through. And when that happens, typically it distorts the shape of the ring. So we've got to form this around a ring mandrel now to make it a perfect circle. So I'm going to slide it onto the ring mandrel. We're going to use a rawhide mallet to do that. This is a rawhide mallet. So we're going to hit down on that, and we are going to spin it as we hit it. And now you can see that this is a perfect circle, and it's ready to be sanded and finished. So at this point, the seam typically has a little bit of a bump there. There's a little bit of a bump, and we need to blend that seam together so that there is no bump on the ends here or on that top. Sometimes there's just a little bump there. So we have to use a file for that. So that's what I'm going to show you next. We're going to blend a seam together. I have two different files here. One is an equal file. That's this file here. It's flat on both sides and flat at the end. One is a half round file. It's pointed at the end and it's rounded on one side and flat on the other. In the beginning of this, it doesn't matter which one we use because we're trying to use the file that fits the job. And the ring here is an outside curve. So we'll need to use a flat side of the file for the outside curve. On the inside curve, we would have to use, if were doing the inside curve, we would have to use the rounded part of the file for the inside of this ring, for filing the inside. So we're going to start by filing the outside. Most times I give you a half round file because it can be used for both jobs, but again, I'm going to show you how we can use this flat file for this outside part here. And now at this point you can start to see the seam sort of blending together, but you can see these little light white spots. Those are indentations, and we're trying to get rid of those. We want it to blend together completely. You're going to see a slight silver line, and I'll actually switch files here to show you how you can use the flat side of the rounded file, half round file, to blend this together. And the idea again is to blend that together so there is no line, no indentation. Now I put texture up toward the edge here, so I gotta make sure I don't file all that out of there. Just want to file that end seam. All right. And now you should be able to see it's nice and blended together. Now I'm going to check these outside edges here, and a lot of times what I'll do is I'll hit those like this and I'll bevel those over just a little bit. So remember, we beveled the edge. We don't want these edges here to have any kind of an indentation to them, so I usually bevel those over just like that. Now that seam is finished on the outside. The inside still needs a little bit of work. I usually take a file and I'll use the rounded part of the file, set it down on the bench pin, and I will file across this way. Now I'm filing across the ring here to blend it because I have no choice. To do that. And most of that is blended together there. But on this outside, I'm sure always to go with the ring. You noticed I filed with the ring this way. You never file across the seam. You end up with a flat spot there. I'm filing with the curvature of the ring whenever I'm blending the outside of the seam. When I'm blending the inside, I don't have a choice. I have to go across it. Okay? And now that's all blended and we're ready to sand it up. Get it ready to buff. All right, I'm ready to sand. I have my 220 emery paper and I have 400 emery paper. I'll also steel wool it at the end before I buff. But I'm gonna always start sanding at the seam when my emery paper is the coarsest or roughest, because I wanna get rid of those file marks. Notice again, I'm filing with the seam, or with the ring, I mean, the curvature of the ring. I'm filing along the ring this way, not side to side. And I want to sand that, sand the edges a little bit where it's beveled, like so. Now, I have that hammered texture there. I don't want to sand that too much with the 220. So I'm going to leave that go for right now, and I'm going to switch over here. So if you have a hammered texture, you have to be careful how you sand that with 220, because you'll sand it right out. Now I'm going to start working on the other part of the ring. Sand all the way around it, like so. When I see that hammered texture start there, I'm going to back off a little bit. That's the texture I put in with the ball peen hammer. I am going to, however, sand the beveled area, so I'm going to sand the edge there. And the idea here is to remove any heavy scratches that might be deeper than the 220 emery. So at this point, it doesn't really take long to sand these rings. Oops. Doesn't really take long to sand the rings. Now I'm going to sand with 400. Now with 400, I am going to sand the entire thing. I'm going to sand the hammered texture, because that will not take out the hammered texture. And I'm also going to sand the seam real well. And you're actually going to start to see it get a little bit shiny. Now notice I saved my 220 emery, because I am going to go back and sand the inside of the ring too. Now you can start to see that get much smoother and shinier. All right, now I'm going to sand the inside of the ring. Notice how I'm using my thumb on the inside. This thumb is on the inside of the ring, and I'm just turning that. I'm using the 220 at this point. Try and get the inside of the ring as smooth as I can, and I work my way around it like that. And you can see that starting to smooth out in there. It's a little harder to get the inside because you cannot put the amount of pressure that you're used to putting in or on the ring for the outside. So now that's completely sanded on the inside with 220, and I will just repeat the process with 400. The inside is completely sanded with 400. See how that's starting to look shiny. The last thing that we're going to do is take some steel wool. And that is a finished sanded ring. ready for the buffing machine. You can see how much different that looks in just a short period of time.